Arrival in Redemption Gulch. The stagecoach ground to a jarring stop, sending Anya careening into the seat before her. A choking cloud of alkali dust swirled outside, momentarily eclipsing the desolate vista. Redemption Gulch. The name tasted like ash. Smoothing the creases from her worn serge dress, she inhaled deeply, a tremor of anticipation warring with trepidation. Today, she'd finally meet Jedediah, her betrothed. The door creaked open, and a wave of scorching air blasted into the coach, pungent with sage and a sharp, metallic tang she couldn't place. A figure stood framed against the sun's glare, a tall, imposing man with a face etched by sun and wind and eyes that scanned her with a practiced, almost mournful, intensity. A tin star glinted on his chest. "Anya Petrova?" His voice, a low, gravelly drawl, filled the confined space. "Duh," she affirmed, her accent thick enough to taste in the arid air. "I am Anya." He extended a hand, rough and weathered. "Sheriff Brody, welcome to Redemption Gulch." His grasp was firm but fleeting. Descending from the coach, Anya saw his gaze sweep over her plain attire, the humble carpetbag clutched in her hand, and the naive hope she struggled to conceal. His features tightened, a shadow of compassion flickering across them. The town itself was a meager cluster of parched buildings, huddled together for solace against the vast, implacable prairie. A saloon, its batwing doors swaying listlessly, dominated one side of the main thoroughfare, a mere rutted track. Opposite, a general mercantile, its windows filmed with grime, offered a meager selection. A scattering of smaller establishments, a smithy, a livery stable, and a pathetic excuse for an inn completed the scene. This bore no resemblance to the vibrant future Jedediah had painted in his letters. "I'll take you to Jedediah," the sheriff stated, his tone devoid of warmth. Anya's pulse quickened. At last. She trailed after him, her bag thumping against her leg, her eyes avidly absorbing the details of her new surroundings, searching. Where was he? Why wasn't he here, eager to greet her? Perhaps work had detained him, or... The sheriff halted before a modest, unpretentious building on the town's periphery. It looked like an office, and a weathered placard declared it the sheriff's office and jail. He pushed open the door, inviting her inside with a gesture. The room was stark, a desk, a pair of mismatched chairs, a rifle rack adorning one wall. The air hung thick with dust motes and the lingering ghost of stale tobacco. He moved behind the desk, his movements measured, almost reluctant, avoiding her gaze. "Miss Petrova," he began, his voice weighted with sorrow. "There's something you need to know." A premonition coiled in Anya's stomach, tightening its grip. Something was terribly amiss. "Jedediah," she prompted, her voice a mere thread. The sheriff sighed, a sound that seemed to exhale a lifetime of regret. Finally he met her gaze, his eyes brimming with a grim kindliness. "Jedediah is gone, Miss Petrova." The word struck Anya like a physical blow, expelling the air from her lungs. The room swam, the sheriff's face blurring before her. Gone? Jedediah? It was impossible. Not Jedediah, the author of those fervent, hopeful letters who had conjured such a vivid image of their life together. Not the man for whom she had traveled halfway across the world. No, she choked out, shaking her head violently. There has to be some mistake. He wrote to me. Only a few weeks ago. I know, Miss Petrova. I know he did. The sheriff's voice was gentle yet firm, unyielding. He was taken by an accident. A week ago. A rockslide up in the canyon. Anya's legs betrayed her, and she crumpled into a chair, her carpetbag landing with a muted thud. The sheriff's words reverberated in her mind, a relentless dirge of despair. Gone. Jedediah was gone. But why wasn't I told? She stammered, tears welling in her eyes, blurring her vision. Why did I come all this way? We dispatched a telegram, the sheriff explained, a furrow creasing his brow. But it appears it didn't reach you in time. I'm deeply sorry, Miss Petrova. Sorry. The word felt hollow, utterly devoid of meaning in the face of such devastation. She had forfeited everything, her family, her homeland, her very existence, for this. For a man she had never laid eyes on but believed she knew through the intimacy of his correspondence. And now he was simply gone. She closed her eyes, a solitary tear escaping to carve a lonely path down her cheek. She was adrift. Utterly, irrevocably adrift. In an alien land, devoid of kin, bereft of friends, robbed of a future. The sheer magnitude of her loss threatened to suffocate her. The sheriff cleared his throat, shattering the oppressive silence. Miss Petrova, I realize this is a crushing blow. I can arrange your passage back to Russia, back home. Home. The notion offered a fleeting warmth instantly eclipsed by the stark reality of her plight. She was penniless. The voyage had consumed her every resource. She was marooned. I have nothing, she whispered, her voice thick with anguish. The sheriff nodded slowly, comprehension dawning in his eyes. I understand. Well, the town will assist you. We'll provide for you until we can secure your return. His concern seemed genuine, but Anya couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. She felt exposed, a gullible fool seduced by a mirage. She had envisioned a new beginning, a life brimming with love and joy. Now, all that remained was desolation and uncertainty. The sheriff extended a glass of water. She accepted it, her hand trembling faintly. The water was cool and refreshing, yet it did little to extinguish the inferno of despair that raged within her. Is there anything of his? She asked, her voice barely audible, a fragile plea hanging in the air. Anything I can keep? Something to remember him by? The sheriff hesitated, a cloud passing over his weathered features. There are his letters, of course, and some personal effects. They're at his place. He proposed taking her there, but Anya demurred, recoiling inwardly. She couldn't face it. Not yet. The prospect of entering the home he had prepared for her, a home now destined to remain forever uninhabited, was too much to endure. I require time, she murmured, returning the glass. Time to collect myself. The sheriff nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. Of course. I'll leave you to it. But I'll be right here should you need anything. He departed the office, closing the door with quiet reverence. Anya was alone once more, engulfed by the silence of the desolate room. She remained there for what felt like an eternity, lost in her lament, the weight of her shattered aspirations pressing down upon her with unyielding force. Redemption Gulch, a place of betrayed promises and decimated dreams. And now her desolate prison, a proposal of convenience. From the mercantile's shadowed entrance, Caleb observed Anya. She sat on the small porch Jedediah had readied, her frame trembling, a wadded handkerchief clutched tight. The sinking sun painted the dusty street in shades of rust and ochre, stretching the shadows long. Though her sobs were inaudible, a stark, gut-wrenching grief contorted her posture. He knew Jedediah had anticipated a mail-order bride, speaking of her with an uncharacteristic, hushed longing. Jedediah, usually the life of any gathering, had nurtured a secret hope for a woman he knew only from portraits. Now that hope was interred alongside him. Caleb straightened, pushing off the doorframe. Words failed him, always had. Jedediah possessed the silver tongue, the one who could charm the birds from the trees. Caleb was the silent caretaker, the one who kept the farm solvent. Yet inaction was impossible. He crossed the street, the crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound in the stillness. As he drew near, Anya raised her head, her eyes swollen and bloodshot. She was slighter than he had pictured, almost ethereal. Her ornate dress, undoubtedly her finest for the voyage, felt jarringly out of place in the desolate town. Miss Petrova, he rasped, his voice unused. He cleared his throat. I'm Caleb, Jedediah's brother. She nodded, a lone tear carving a clean streak through the grime on her face. I know. He shifted his weight, uncertain how to proceed. He hadn't orchestrated this moment. He rarely planned beyond the next sunrise. Sheriff Brody informs me you're without funds. Anya's head dipped, her gaze fixed on her lap. Everything I owned, gone. Consumed by the passage. A knot formed in Caleb's throat. He understood the precariousness of a woman alone and destitute in Redemption Gulch. She'd be at the town's mercy, a town that, despite its better nature, could be unsparing. He had to intervene. Miss Petrova, he began, the words feeling like rough stones in his mouth. I realize the timing is abhorrent and the circumstances far from ideal, but I wish to propose a marriage of expediency. Her head jerked up, astonishment widening her eyes. Marriage? Yes, ma'am. Not a love match, understand. But I offer a home, sustenance. Security. He hurried on, the words tumbling out in a tangled rush. Jedediah would have wanted you cared for. And I can't abide seeing you. He faltered, unable to voice the dread that gripped him. The fear of her being ruined, abandoned to starvation, or worse. Anya scrutinized him, her expression indecipherable. The silence hung heavy, thick with unspoken anxieties. He could faintly hear the clip-clop of horseshoes and the distant murmur of voices, yet his entire being was absorbed in her response. At last, she spoke, her voice barely audible. Why? He hesitated. Because it's the decent thing. He averted his gaze. Because Jedediah was my brother. Unseen, Mrs. Abernathy, the baker's spouse, spied from behind her shop's lace curtains. She had observed the arrival of the elegant woman, absorbed the tidings of Jedediah's sudden passing, and now witnessed the furtive exchange on the porch. In a matter of minutes, the story was spreading like prairie fire. "Did you hear about that bride sent through the post?" Mrs. Abernathy hissed to Mrs. Higgins, the seamstress, as she adjusted a hem. "The poor dear arrived just yesterday, only to discover her betrothed 6 feet under. They say she's got nothing to her name." "Good heavens!" Mrs. Higgins exclaimed, her eyes like saucers. "What will become of her?" "That's not the gist of it, dear," Mrs. Abernathy continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "I just observed Caleb Harding in deep conversation with her. Mighty close, if you ask me. Some speculate he might take her in. Even marry her." Mrs. Higgins gasped. "Caleb? But he's so reserved. And barely acquainted with her." "Well," Mrs. Abernathy observed with a knowing grin, "desperate days call for desperate deeds. And a fresh widow with no resources. Well, she's ripe pickings. And a desolate farmer, well, you see how the stars might align." The whispers continued, weaving a tapestry of conjecture and censure. Anya, the woman who had arrived with aspiration, was now reduced to gossip fodder, her destiny teetering precariously. A hesitant agreement. The spare furnishings of her boarding house room felt like a jeer. A cracked washbowl, a meager iron bed, wallpaper whose floral patterns seemed to wilt with her own spirits. Anya's fingertip trembled as she traced a bloom, the coarse paper a world away from the shimmering silks she'd anticipated. That bright future had dissolved with Jedediah's final breath. Caleb's proposal lingered, a rope tossed to someone drowning in despair. Was it rescue or simply a differently shaped cage? Marriage to Jedediah had been a vibrant tapestry woven from his letters, promising partnership, family, a love that defied distance. Caleb offered, what, exactly? Safety without question. Stability, perhaps? But affection? The very notion felt disloyal to the man she'd never encountered, yet mourned deeply. She stood and walked to the small, grimy window. Redemption Gulch unfolded beneath her, a cluster of raw buildings scorching under the relentless sun. This stark landscape bore no resemblance to the rolling green hills of her homeland, the vibrant city left behind. This place, this community, this existence, all felt foreign, undesirable. A sudden recollection surfaced, Jedediah's letters. She pictured the elegant slant of his script, the poetic language conjuring a tender soul. Had she been naive to entrust her dreams to ink on paper? Had her pursuit been a mirage? A hesitant knock broke her reverie. "Anya? Reverend Thompson here. May I?" Smoothing her worn skirt, she opened the door. The clergyman's kind face offered a small comfort. He stepped into the confined space, filling it with an aura of peace. "I realize this is a trying time, child," he began, his tone soothing. "The Lord's path is often circuitous." Anya offered a fragile smile. "Intricate indeed, Reverend. I arrived expecting one life, and now—" Her voice trailed off, failing to capture the tempest within. He indicated the bed. "May I sit?" Anya nodded, and he settled down, his compassionate eyes unwavering. "Caleb informs me he has asked for your hand." Anya felt a nervous flutter. "He has. And I am at a loss. A monumental decision, Anya. One demanding careful consideration. But I know Caleb well. He's a solid man. Reserved, perhaps, but possessing a spirit as generous as this valley." He swept his hand toward the window. "He may not woo you with soaring declarations, but he'll offer constancy, protection, and a firm hand to navigate life's storms. But I sought love, Reverend. A true union, a family." The words were a breath saturated with the anguish of collapsed hopes. Reverend Thompson sighed softly. "Sometimes, child, love arrives in unexpected forms. Jedediah is at peace now. His brother perceives your hardship, your vulnerability. He extends an opportunity to build a life here, a refuge in a world that can be merciless." He paused, his gaze softening further. "Don't discount Caleb because he does not embody your expectations. Look into his soul, Anya. Recognize the goodness there, the genuine concern he harbors. Perhaps, in time, something deeper will take root. But even if that doesn't occur, you'll have a dependable man at your side, a guardian, a companion." Anya stared at her hands, twisting the fabric of her skirt. The Reverend's words struck a painful chord of truth. She'd stepped off the stagecoach anticipating a romance lifted from a storybook, but existence often defied such narratives. Caleb wasn't the dazzling figure she'd envisioned, but he offered something substantial, something real in a world that had abruptly become frighteningly unstable. "Pray on it, child," the Reverend instructed, rising to his feet. "Seek divine guidance and heed the whispers of your heart. The answer will reveal itself." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Don't be afraid to embrace a different form of happiness than the one you pictured. He departed, leaving her alone again, the silence amplifying her inner conflict. A different form of happiness. The phrase echoed in her thoughts. Could she find contentment with Caleb? Could she accept something shy of the passionate romance she'd craved? Or was acceptance the most sensible and possibly even the bravest path she could tread? A somber union. A dolorous wind snaked through Redemption Gulch on Anya and Caleb's wedding day, its lament a stark contrast to any celebratory tune. It was a mournful whisper that resonated with the ache in Anya's soul. Above, the heavens wept in shades of pewter, a thread of showers mirroring the reservoir of unshed tears within her. She faced Reverend Thompson, Caleb a stoic figure beside her. The coarse fabric of his suit grazed her exposed arms, a constant, subtle irritation. Her gown, hastily refashioned from a dress meant for a different future, felt less like a promise and more like a heavy pall. The delicate tracery of lace, once a beacon of hope, now seemed to mock her present reality. Her gaze locked onto a flaw in the rough-hewn floorboards of the makeshift church. "Friends, we gather here today." Reverend Thompson's baritone, usually so soothing, now sounded thin and far away. His words spoke of commitment, of fresh starts, of finding peace through faith. Anya heard them, yet they failed to penetrate the fog that had settled deep within her. Caleb's hand, roughened by work and warm with life, closed over hers. It was a small act, a wordless pledge of support, yet it did little to quell the turmoil within. His touch, gentle and reassuring as it was, lacked the electric charge, the fervent heat she had, in her naivete, expected from true love. The vows escaped her lips, barely audible. Caleb's responses were firm, unwavering, imbued with a quiet conviction that both humbled and stung her. He believed in this future, in the prospect of building a life together. How she envied his certainty, his unshakable sense of purpose. When Reverend Thompson declared them husband and wife, a soft susurrus moved through the small gathering. Anya barely registered the offered good wishes and hesitant congratulations. She caught Mrs. Olson's sympathetic glance, the wide-eyed curiosity in young Billy's expression, the quiet resignation etched on Caleb's father's face. The wedding meal was a subdued affair. The women of Redemption Gulch had prepared a modest spread, roasted fowl, potatoes, beans, and a forlorn cake adorned with fading wildflowers. Anya merely toyed with her food, the flavors registering as dull and lifeless. Caleb ate with quiet focus, his eyes flicking to her frequently, laced with concern. "Are you all right, Anya?" he murmured, his voice low and solicitous. She manufactured a smile. "I'm fine, Caleb. Just tired." He nodded, accepting her excuse without argument. He didn't push, didn't demand more than she was willing to offer. She appreciated his understanding, yet also chafed at his restraint. Did he not crave more? Did he not feel the crushing weight of their circumstances? As dusk painted the gulch in long, somber strokes, Anya found herself alone with Caleb in the small cabin he'd built with his own hands. It was a spare dwelling, yet tidy and well-kept, boasting solid furniture and a meticulously stacked woodpile near the fireplace. He cleared a space for her things, her trunk now standing sentinel beside the bed. Bed. The word echoed in the silence between them, heavy with unspoken implications. "I'll take the floor tonight," Caleb broke the quiet, gesturing toward a pile of blankets in the corner. Anya looked up, taken aback. "You don't have to." "I know," he replied, his gaze direct and honest. "But I want to. Until you're ready." His consideration unlocked a flood of emotion, gratitude, guilt, a tangled confusion she couldn't begin to untangle. Speechless, she simply nodded. Later, stretched out in the unfamiliar bed, Anya stared up at the roughly hewn timbers of the ceiling. The sharp scent of pine permeated the air, mingling with the lingering tang of wood smoke. She listened to the faint sounds of Caleb settling down on the floor, the steady sighs of the cabin settling against the night wind. Sleep remained distant. Her mind surged with memories of the day, the weeks, the months that had conspired to bring her here. She had arrived in Redemption Gulch seeking love and adventure. Instead, she had encountered death, bereavement, and a marriage founded on duty. She wondered if she would ever discover joy in this new existence. If she could ever come to cherish Caleb, this reserved, dependable man who had offered her sanctuary from the storm. Or if she was destined to remain forever shadowed by the specter of all that she had lost. The approaching drought. The dust swirled like restless spirits, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. It settled on the porch swing where Anya sat, on the wilting sunflowers she had tried to coax back to life, and on the parched fields that stretched out before her, fields that were Caleb's livelihood. Each day, the sun beat down with merciless intensity. The creek that usually gurgled merrily behind the house was now a stagnant trickle, barely enough to water the livestock. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of dry earth and desperation. Anya watched as Caleb walked through the rows of corn. His shoulders slumped. He ran a hand over the brittle stalks, his expression grim. It was worse than yesterday. The once vibrant green was now a sickly yellow, the kernels shriveled and useless. He didn't say anything when he returned to the house, just rinsed his hands in the meager water basin and went inside. Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Anya knew what he was thinking. They both were. The drought was no longer a threat. It was a reality. That evening, the tension spilled over into the supper table. Anya pushed the tasteless stew around her plate, her appetite gone. Caleb ate mechanically, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the window. "We need rain," she finally said, breaking the silence. Caleb sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "We do, but the sky's been clear for weeks. Sheriff Brody was saying they ain't had measurable rainfall in months." Anya remembered Brody's visit after Jedediah's death. He had informed her that Jedediah had little money saved. What little there was had gone to pay for the land. She had less than nothing. The next day, Anya ventured into town. The usual bustle was subdued, replaced by a palpable anxiety. People huddled in small groups, their voices low and worried. The general store, usually overflowing with goods, had noticeably bare shelves. She overheard snippets of conversations: "Water's running low, crops are failing, don't know how we'll make it through the winter." At the well, women lined up with buckets, their faces etched with fatigue and worry. The well's crank groaned with each laborious turn. Even the children were quieter than usual, their games abandoned in the face of the looming hardship. Anya watched a young mother struggle to lift a half-full bucket, her face streaked with sweat and dust. Impulsively, Anya stepped forward. "Let me help you with that." The woman looked at her, surprised. "Thank you. It's getting harder every day." As they walked together, the woman spoke of her fears. Her husband was a farmer, like Caleb. Their livelihood depended on the land, and the land was dying. "We're thinking of moving on," she confessed quietly. "Heading west, maybe? Heard there's work to be found there. But leaving everything we know." Anya understood that fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of losing everything. She had come to Redemption Gulch seeking a new beginning, only to be met with tragedy and uncertainty. Now, the very foundation of this small town was crumbling. Returning to the farm, Anya found Caleb repairing a section of the fence. She watched him for a moment, the sun glinting off his sweat-dampened hair. His movements were slow, deliberate, each action performed with a quiet determination. She knew he was worried, probably terrified, but he wouldn't show it. He would bear the burden silently, protecting her from the full extent of their predicament. "Caleb," she said softly. He looked up, his eyes filled with a weariness that made her heart ache. "The town, they're worried." He nodded. "Everyone is. What will we do?" He wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "We'll do what we always do. We'll keep working. We'll ration what we have. And we'll pray for rain." His words were simple, but they held a strength that Anya found strangely comforting. He might not be the man she had expected to marry, but he was a man of unwavering resilience, a man who would face adversity head-on, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the parched fields, Anya looked up at the cloudless sky. The drought had arrived, bringing with it hardship and fear. But it had also revealed something else, the quiet strength of the man she had married and the unexpected bonds that were beginning to form between them. Whether it would be enough to see them through, she didn't know. But as she looked at Caleb, she hoped. She truly hoped. Whispers of wisdom. The dust devils danced across the parched fields, mocking their efforts. Another day, another sliver of hope withered and blew away. Caleb returned from the well, his shoulders slumped, the water bucket only half full. He placed it carefully on the porch, avoiding Anya's gaze as he wiped the sweat from his brow with a dirt-stained handkerchief. She watched him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence between them was a heavy thing, thick with unspoken fears and the relentless creak of the windmill desperately trying to draw water from a depleted source. Finally, Anya spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Back home, in Volgograd, we learned to capture the morning dew." Caleb turned, his expression guarded. "Dew? Anya, we're talking about irrigating fields, not watering a windowsill herb garden." She bristled at his dismissiveness, a spark of defiance igniting in her eyes. It is not so simple. We spread cloths, large sheets, over the ground at night. The dew collects and we wring them out into cisterns. Every drop matters. He scoffed, a dry, humorless sound. Cloth? We barely have enough water to keep ourselves alive, let alone waste it washing cloth big enough to make a difference. Anya stood, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. It would not be wasted. The cloth would be reused night after night. And the water could save your crops, Caleb. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the grieving widow of his brother, but a woman with knowledge, with a fire he hadn't noticed before. He saw desperation mirrored in her eyes, the same desperation that gnawed at his own insides. It sounds impractical, he said, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. He pictured acres of precious cotton sheeting soaked with dew and felt a pang in his chest. That cotton was worth more than its weight in water. Impractical is watching your farm turn to dust, Anya countered, her voice rising slightly. What other choice do you have? He knew she was right. He had tried everything he could think of, prayed for rain, even considered selling off the last of their livestock. All had failed. Desperation was a bitter pill, but swallowing it might be the only way to survive. All right, he said, the word heavy with reluctance. All right, Anya. We'll try your dew cloths. A flicker of hope crossed Anya's face, a fragile bloom in the barren landscape of her grief. I will need help spreading them. And stones to weigh them down. Caleb nodded. We'll find stones. And cloth. We'll find something. The next morning, before the sun had even begun to paint the sky, they were out in the fields. Anya directed Caleb with a quiet authority, showing him how to lay the old flour sacks and worn bedsheets across the dry earth, securing them with rocks. The air was still and cool, heavy with the promise of another scorching day. Caleb felt foolish, ridiculous even. He was a farmer, a man of the land, and here he was, spreading rags like some kind of, well, he didn't even know what. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was wasting his time, indulging in a fanciful dream. As they worked, Anya told him about Volgograd, about the long, cold winters and the dry, unforgiving summers. She spoke of the ingenuity of the people, their resilience in the face of hardship. Her words painted a vivid picture, a landscape both foreign and familiar. By the time the sun crested the horizon, a patchwork of white and faded colors covered a small section of the field. They stood back, surveying their work. Now we wait, Anya said, her voice barely a whisper. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't want to voice his doubts, to crush the fragile hope that had taken root in Anya's eyes. But as he looked at the vast, parched landscape, he couldn't help but feel that it was all a futile gesture. That night, under a sky teeming with stars, Caleb found himself unable to sleep. He tossed and turned, the image of the dusty fields and the hopeful look on Anya's face burned into his mind. He slipped out of bed, pulled on his boots, and walked out into the darkness. The air was cool and damp, a welcome change from the stifling heat of the day. He walked towards the field, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and something else. Something akin to hope. As he approached the first cloth, he knelt down and touched it. It was damp. He ran his hand across the surface, feeling the cool moisture clinging to the fabric. He squeezed the cloth, and a few precious drops of water trickled into his palm. He moved to another cloth and another, each one damp with dew. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small victory against the relentless drought. He stood up, the cool night air filling his lungs. He looked up at the star-studded sky, a silent prayer forming on his lips. Maybe, just maybe, Anya's whispers of wisdom could save them after all. Shared labor, growing trust. The first light painted the parched fields in shades of ochre and rose as Anya and Caleb set to work. The cloths, now slightly damp, felt cool against Anya's calloused hands. Caleb, beside her, carefully wrung out each one, collecting the precious dew in a large bucket. The silence between them wasn't strained today, but held a quiet purpose. A shared understanding born of desperation and a fragile, budding hope. We'll need more cloths, Anya said, her voice raspy from the dry air. Many more if we want to make any real difference. Caleb nodded, his gaze sweeping across the vast, thirsty land. Ma had a trunk full of old linens upstairs. Been meaning to sort through them. Never seemed to find the time. He straightened, the bucket heavy in his grip. I'll fetch them after breakfast. The sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and heavy. Anya showed Caleb how to properly lay the cloths, choosing the spots where the sparse vegetation seemed most withered. She explained the subtle science of dew collection, how air currents and ground temperature played a part. Caleb listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration, absorbing every detail. He wasn't a man of many words, but his attentiveness spoke volumes. They worked steadily, side by side, 4 hours. The rhythmic movements of laying the cloths, wringing them out, and collecting the water became a shared meditation. The only sounds were the rustle of fabric, the creak of the well when Caleb drew water to dampen the cloths further, and the distant caw of a crow. By midday, the heat was almost unbearable. Sweat stung Anya's eyes, and her muscles ached. Caleb, his face flushed and streaked with dirt, insisted they stop for a break. He led her to the shade of a lone cottonwood tree at the edge of the field. He produced 2 apples from his saddlebag, their skins slightly wrinkled but still offering a welcome burst of sweetness. They ate in silence, the juice dribbling down their chins. Anya watched Caleb, noticing the lines etched around his eyes, lines that spoke of years of hard work and worry. "Thank you, Caleb," she said softly, breaking the silence. He looked up, startled. "For what?" "For helping me. For believing in this." She gestured to the fields with a sweep of her hand. A faint blush crept up his neck. "It's worth a try. And you know more about this than I do." He avoided her gaze, focusing on the apple core in his hand. After their brief respite, they returned to the fields, working until the sun began to dip below the horizon. The collected water, though a mere trickle compared to what they needed, was enough to dampen the parched earth around a few of the young corn stalks. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they trudged back to the house, exhausted but strangely energized. Inside, Caleb lit a kerosene lamp, casting a warm glow on the simple furnishings. He set about preparing a meager supper of beans and cornbread. Anya watched him move around the kitchen, his movements efficient and familiar. He wasn't a demonstrative man, but his quiet competence was a comfort. She offered to help, and together they set the table. They ate in silence, the only sound the clinking of spoons against bowls. The food was simple, but after a long day of labor, it tasted satisfying. When they were finished, Caleb cleared the table, his movements deliberate. He turned to Anya, his expression earnest. "Thank you, Anya," he said, his voice low. For everything you're doing. I don't know what we would have done without you." His words, simple and heartfelt, resonated deep within her. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something precious, gratitude, respect, and a shared sense of purpose. It was a foundation upon which something more could be built, a fragile bridge spanning the chasm of grief and circumstance that separated them. Anya met his gaze, a faint smile gracing her lips. "We're in this together, Caleb." The businessman's offer. Dust devils danced like restless spirits as a gleaming ebony carriage rolled into Redemption Gulch, a jarring spectacle amidst the time-worn wagons and sun-bleached facades. Silas Blackwood, his bespoke suit a stark contrast to the denims and faded cottons around him, alighted with practiced ease. A broad, seemingly affable smile stretched across his face, yet his gaze remained icily calculating as he surveyed the assembled townsfolk, their faces creased with anxiety. "People of Redemption Gulch," he proclaimed, his voice resonant with authority and a subtle hint of disdain, "I am Silas Blackwood, here to extend a lifeline." Standing beside Caleb near the mercantile, Anya felt a shiver crawl down her spine. Blackwood's arrival felt less like rescue, more like a predator circling weakened prey. Even Caleb, usually oblivious to social cues, seemed uneasy, his hand a reassuring weight at the small of Anya's back. Blackwood launched into his proposition, words carefully crafted to exploit their desperation. He spoke of the unrelenting drought, painting a grim picture supposedly gleaned from Sheriff Brody himself. He detailed the withered harvests, dwindling resources, and the inevitable abandonment that threatened to turn Redemption Gulch into a memory. Then the offer: he would purchase their land at what he called fair market value, given the circumstances. A sum, Anya surmised, far inferior to the land's true worth. A murmur stirred through the crowd. Some, faces hollow and gaunt, appeared ready to grasp at any promise of escape. Others, like old Mr. Abernathy, whose family had tilled these fields for generations, stood resolute, suspicion etching their features. "What are your intentions for our land, Mr. Blackwood?" Abernathy challenged, his voice gravelly but firm. Blackwood's smile broadened, acquiring a predatory edge. "Why, Mr. Abernathy, to revitalize it. To invest in progressive techniques, introduce necessary provisions. To transform Redemption Gulch into a flourishing center again." His words flowed smoothly, yet Anya detected a glint of steel beneath the veneer. He wasn't here to save Redemption Gulch, he was here to claim it. Later that evening, after Blackwood had retreated to the boarding house's sole available room, Anya and Caleb sat on their porch as twilight painted the landscape in muted hues of mauve and slate. The air, usually thick with the scent of parched earth, now vibrated with a different kind of tension. "He's not here to assist," Anya stated quietly. "He's here to exploit." Caleb nodded, his jaw clenched. "I don't trust him. There's something about his eyes." "We need to consult Sheriff Brody," Anya urged. Ascertain precisely what he disclosed to Blackwood, and what Blackwood truly intends. The following morning they found Sheriff Brody nursing a cup of coffee at the local eatery. He listened patiently as Anya and Caleb recounted Blackwood's proposition and their misgivings. Blackwood's been probing, Brody conceded, rubbing his weary eyes. And yes, I informed him of the drought's severity. It's my obligation to apprise anyone inquiring about Redemption Gulch's situation. But I didn't invite him to come here and defraud my people. Do you have any knowledge of his plans for the land? Anya pressed. Brody sighed. He alluded to mineral rights. Claimed he'd heard whispers of potential silver or gold deposits somewhere in the vicinity. He paused, his expression hardening. If that's accurate and Blackwood possesses knowledge we lack, then he's treading on dangerous ground. Anya exchanged a concerned glance with Caleb. Blackwood's arrival hadn't ushered in salvation, it had unleashed a new, more insidious danger. The drought was nature's trial, Blackwood was humanity's. And they were only beginning to grasp the magnitude of the challenge he presented. The wind intensified, whipping up dust devils that skittered down the deserted main street, carrying with them murmurs of doubt and apprehension. Blackwood's offer lingered in the atmosphere, a seductive poison threatening to devour what little hope remained in Redemption Gulch. Secrets revealed. The contract lay spread on the table, the stark light of the oil lamp highlighting its dense text. Across from Anya, Caleb frowned, wrestling with Blackwood's proposition. Legal complexities swam before him. The gist was clear enough. Blackwood offered a sum for their land, a sum insulting in its inadequacy, especially given its untapped potential. Yet Anya sensed a deeper deception, a hidden bar beneath the gilded surface of the agreement. There, she stated, her finger jabbing at a specific paragraph halfway down. The abrupt gesture belied the anxiety gnawing at her composure. Read this. Caleb followed her instruction, his lips moving in silent translation as he parsed the convoluted phrasing. Terms like perpetual easement and mineral extraction rights snagged his attention. He glanced up, bewilderment clouding his features. I don't get it, Anya. Her voice, taut with apprehension, clarified. It means that regardless of the land's yield, whether crops flourish or wither, Blackwood secures ownership of any resources hidden beneath it. And not just for a season, Caleb, but in perpetuity. The air in the cramped cabin grew heavy, laden with unspoken implications. The full extent of Blackwood's ambition crashed over Caleb. This wasn't merely a transaction for acreage, it was a play for the future of Redemption Gulch, regardless of the human cost. He scanned the paragraph again, now seeing a sinister subtext in every word. This was not a lifeline, but a noose. He knew about the minerals. Caleb breathed, the realization hitting him with force. Brody must have told him. That's why he's here? Anya nodded, her gaze riveted to the damning document. He's exploiting our desperation, preying on our vulnerability. She rose, restlessly traversing the confined space. We have to warn everyone. Caleb followed suit, his initial shock solidifying into a core of defiance. Tomorrow, we'll convene a town meeting. Word raced through Redemption Gulch with the swiftness of a prairie fire. By noon, the townsfolk had congregated in the dusty plaza before the church. The sun's relentless glare mirrored the anxiety etched on their faces. Reverend Thompson stood on the steps, his calm demeanor offering a measure of solace. Friends, he announced, his voice resonating across the assembly. We gather today to address a matter of the gravest nature, one that impacts the very destiny of our community. He indicated Caleb, who stepped forward, Anya by his side. Caleb, unaccustomed to public address, steeled himself. He surveyed the crowd, faces etched with hardship, yet displaying a quiet resilience. He noticed Mrs. Olson, her hands clasped tight, and young Timmy, perched atop his father's shoulders, his eyes wide with curiosity. Carefully, deliberately, he laid out Blackwood's offer and their growing misgivings. Times are difficult, we all know that, he stated, his voice gaining strength. The drought has taken its pound of flesh, but we cannot allow hardship to blind us. We must exercise caution in whom we place our trust. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathering. Fear was evident, but so was a nascent spark of resistance. Anya then took the stage. She held up the contract, its parchment rustling like dry leaves in the wind. I scrutinized this document, she declared, her voice clear and unwavering despite a slight tremor. And I unearthed a clause that Mr. Blackwood wished to keep hidden from you. She elucidated the intricate language, breaking down the legalese into terms the people could readily grasp. She detailed the perpetual easement, the mineral extraction rights, the potential for Blackwood to bleed the land dry, leaving them with nothing but desolation. As she spoke, the murmur swelled into a low, ominous growl of indignation. Sheriff Brody pushed forward, his face a mask of mortification. I was unaware, he confessed, his voice faltering. He merely inquired about the drought. I would never have. It's not your fault, Brody, Caleb interjected, placing a reassuring hand on the sheriff's shoulder. He's a master of persuasion, that one. He preys on vulnerabilities. Anya continued, her gaze sweeping over the assembly. We stand at a crossroads, she stated. We can capitulate, sell our heritage for a song, and witness Redemption Gulch transform into a forgotten memory. Or we can unite, fight for our future, and demonstrate that we are more than just a parched landscape. Silence descended upon the square, broken only by the whisper of wind through the brittle trees. Then, a voice cut through the quiet. It was Mrs. Olson, her tone surprisingly forceful. We ain't surrendering, she avowed. We've weathered worse calamities than this. We'll stand our ground. A chorus of affirmation erupted, spreading through the crowd like a jolt of electricity. Faces hardened with determination. They would not succumb. They would endure. What is our course of action? Someone demanded. Caleb exchanged a look with Anya, a silent conversation passing between them. She nodded, her eyes gleaming with resolve. He turned to the crowd. We'll expose him, he proclaimed. We'll reveal his true intentions to everyone, and we'll accomplish it together. Redemption's hope. The air in the Redemption Gulch General Store vibrated with a tense expectancy. All eyes followed Silas Blackwood, a self-satisfied smirk etched on his face, poised to finalize the land deals. Anya, her hand a light anchor on Caleb's arm, offered silent support. She sensed the coiled tension within him, a whirlwind of just indignation. All right, folks, Blackwood's voice, amplified by the close quarters, cut through the silence. Time to seal the deal. Who's ready to sign and secure their prosperity? A smattering of hands rose, lacking the previous day's fervor, replaced by a palpable disquiet. With a determined stride, Caleb's boots struck a resonant rhythm on the wooden floor. Hold it right there, Blackwood, he declared, his voice ringing with newfound resolve. Before anyone commits, there's something you all need to understand. Blackwood's smile flickered like a faulty lamp. And what revelation might that be, Mr. Harding? Anya stepped forward, producing a contract from her satchel. This, she announced, displaying it for all to see, isn't a land deal, it's a fleecing. Her voice, clear and resonant, sliced through the legal jargon, translating it into common sense. This clause, specifically, stipulates that Blackwood's company retains permanent mineral rights even after you repurchase the land. Essentially, he can mine your property at will, regardless of the devastation inflicted. A collective intake of breath swept the room. The hesitant hands dropped like lead weights. Whispers of disbelief and outrage snaked through the crowd. That's a fabrication, Blackwood bellowed, his complexion deepening to crimson. She's distorting my words. Caleb positioned himself protectively before Anya, a bulwark against Blackwood's wrath. We had legal counsel examine it, Blackwood. It's all there, plain as day. You intended to drain this town of its lifeblood. Sheriff Brody, who had been observing from the periphery, a picture of detached neutrality, suddenly straightened, his features etched with mortification. Silas, is this true? He demanded, a note of betrayal in his tone. Blackwood stammered, scrambling to regain control of the narrative. It's standard practice. Everyone operates this way. Not in Redemption Gulch. They don't, Brody countered, his voice hardening into granite. Turning to the townsfolk, he confessed, Folks, I swear, I was ignorant of this. I believed he was acting honorably. Anya watched as comprehension dawned on the faces around her. Driven by desperation born of the relentless drought, they had been willing to ignore the ominous signs. Now they confronted the stark reality of Blackwood's deceit. The atmosphere transformed. Fear and uncertainty ceded ground to unwavering resolve. Jedediah's passing had forged a bond between them, and Blackwood's treachery had only served to temper that bond, making it unbreakable. They would not be victims. Leave Redemption Gulch, Blackwood, Brody commanded, his hand hovering near his sidearm. And do not return. Blackwood, deflated and humiliated, snatched up his papers and stormed from the store, a string of muttered threats trailing in his wake. The crowd followed his departure with their gaze, a collective exhalation of relief washing over them. As the townsfolk began to disperse, offering their gratitude to Anya and Caleb, Caleb turned to Anya, his eyes brimming with appreciation. "You saved us, Anya," he said softly. "You saved Redemption Gulch." Anya's smile bloomed, her heart overflowing. "We saved it, Caleb. Together." Under a sky ablaze with the embers of sunset, they walked back toward the farm in a comfortable silence. The air, cool and invigorating, carried the mingled scents of sagebrush and damp earth. Reaching the porch, Caleb halted, turning to face Anya. "Anya," he began, a tremor in his voice, I never anticipated any of this. Jedediah's death, our marriage. It all unfolded so quickly." Anya nodded, understanding the emotional currents roiling within him. "Neither did I, Caleb." He reached out, his fingers closing gently around her hand. But somewhere along the way, he confessed, his gaze locking with hers, something shifted. "I started to care for you. More deeply than I ever imagined possible." Anya's breath caught in her chest. So absorbed in survival, in aiding the town, she had suppressed the emerging emotions she felt for Caleb. But hearing his words, she could no longer deny the truth. "I care for you too, Caleb," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "More than you realize." He stepped closer, his hand rising to cradle her cheek. "Anya," he murmured, I think I'm falling in love with you." A lone tear escaped Anya's eye, tracing a glistening path down her cheek. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Caleb." He lowered his head and kissed her, a tender, gentle kiss that spoke of shared sorrow, resilience, and a love that had unexpectedly blossomed. It was a kiss that sealed their connection, born not of obligation or duty, but of genuine affection and abiding love. Standing there in each other's embrace, watching the first stars prick the darkening canvas of the night sky, they knew their journey was far from its end. Challenges lay ahead, droughts to endure, and uncertainties to navigate. But they would confront them together, hand in hand, their love a radiant beacon in the heart of Redemption Gulch. They had found love in the unlikeliest of places, where they were destined to be.